The rise of the Roman centurion, origins, evolution, and role in the Republic. The Roman centurion was more than just a soldier. He was a symbol of Rome's discipline, resilience, and military might. From the early days of the Republic to the peak of Roman dominance, centurions were the backbone of the legion's leaders who combined tactical skill with relentless personal bravery. But how did these men rise to such prominence? What was their role in shaping Rome's military machine? And what made them different from the officers at other ancient armies? This first part of our deep dive explores the origins of the centurion in the Roman Republic, how the Roman military evolved from citizen militias to professional legions, the rank, training, and battlefield responsibilities of centurions, their role in shaping Rome's wars and expansion. By the end of this section, we'll understand why centurions became legendary figures, feared by Rome's enemies and respected by its citizens. The birth of the Roman centurion, from citizen militias to professional soldiers. In the earliest days of Rome, warfare was not the domain of professionals. The Roman army was a citizen militia, where landowning men were expected to defend their city in times of war. These early forces resembled Greek hoplite armies, with heavily armored infantry fighting in tight formations. But as Rome expanded, this model proved unsustainable. Wars became longer and more demanding, and the need for a structured command system grew. The solution? The emergence of centurions, battle-hardened men who led Rome's increasingly professional forces. The transition from militia to professional army was slow, driven by necessity. Frequent wars required standing armies rather than seasonal fighters. Rome's conquests in Italy and beyond demanded career soldiers rather than temporary militias. The introduction of the maniple system, which replaced the rigid Greek phalanx, created a need for small unit leadership, the role that centurions would fill. The centurion was born from this shift. He was the perfect middle ground between the common soldier and high-ranking generals, a frontline commander who enforced discipline while leading from the front. What made a centurion? Rank, training, and leadership. To become a centurion in the Roman Republic was no small feat. Unlike modern military officers, centurions were not appointed from the nobility. They were promoted from the ranks based on merit. The path to becoming a centurion. A Roman soldier who aspired to become a centurion had to demonstrate unmatched courage in battle, strict discipline, and ability to enforce orders. Tactical thinking. Centurions needed to make split-second decisions. Promotions were often earned on the battlefield, with commanders recognizing those who displayed leadership under fire. This ensured that centurions were not just officers, they were proven warriors who led by example. Training and responsibilities. Centurions were responsible for training their men, instilling discipline, and maintaining unit cohesion. Their duties included drilling soldiers to ensure formations remained strong under pressure, enforcing discipline, using harsh punishments for disobedience, commanding units in battle, making tactical decisions, serving as intermediaries between common soldiers and higher command. A legion typically had 60 centurions, each commanding a century around 80 men. Despite the name, they ranked in a hierarchy, with the primus pilus, the senior-most centurion, holding significant influence. This structure ensured that Rome's armies remained organized, adaptable, and disciplined, qualities that gave them an edge over less structured enemy forces. Centurions in the Roman Republic's greatest battles. The Punic Wars. The centurion's role in Rome's rise. Rome's wars with Carthage to 64 to 146 BC tested the limits of its military system. Against the legendary Hannibal, centurions played a vital role in adapting Roman tactics. At Cannae to 16 BC, Hannibal's double envelopment destroyed a Roman army of 80,000. Though the battle was a disaster, surviving centurions helped reform Roman tactics afterward. In the final defeat of Carthage 146 BC, centurions led the brutal urban combat that razed the city to the ground. These wars proved that centurions were not just frontline commanders, they were adaptive leaders, helping Rome recover from crushing defeats. The Marian reforms, the professionalization of the Roman army. By the late Republic, reforms by Gaius Marius 107 BC fundamentally changed the military. The biggest shifts included ending the property requirement for soldiers. Now anyone could serve, creating a professional standing army, standardizing legionary equipment and training, making Rome's forces more uniform, giving centurions even greater authority, as professional soldiers needed strict discipline. This period saw centurions become the core of the Roman war machine, evolving from mere officers to near celebrities within the military hierarchy. The centurion as a political figure. By the end of the Republic, centurions were more than just soldiers, they were political players. Their loyalty could make or break a general's power. Julius Caesar and the power of the centurions. One of the best examples of this shift was Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars 585 BC. Caesar relied heavily on his centurions to maintain loyalty among his legions. He rewarded them handsomely, ensuring their personal allegiance. During the civil war against Pompey, centurions helped persuade soldiers to support Caesar, proving their influence extended beyond the battlefield. By the time Rome transitioned from republic to empire, centurions were no longer just military officers, they were kingmakers. The centurion's rise to power. The early centurion was a battlefield leader, a trainer, and a disciplinarian. But as Rome expanded, his role evolved. No longer just a military officer, the centurion had become a symbol of Rome's military excellence, a key player in political struggles, the foundation of the professional Roman army. The Roman centurion in the age of empire, power, prestige, and politics. In the previous section, we explored how centurions emerged as the backbone of Rome's legions during the Republic. As Rome transitioned into an empire, their role expanded even further. No longer just battlefield leaders, centurions became political power players, enforcers of imperial will, and symbols of Roman authority. But what did it mean to be a centurion in the imperial era? How did their power grow under emperors? And how did their relationship with the state shape the stability or chaos of Rome? In Part 2, we will uncover the evolution of the centurion's role under Augustus and his successors, their new responsibilities in administration, law enforcement, and imperial politics, how centurions became figures of immense power, sometimes challenging emperors themselves, the famous centurions of the early empire, their influence, and their legacy. This section will highlight the golden age of the centurion and era, when these men were more than soldiers, they were pillars of Rome's dominance. The Augustan reforms and the rise of the imperial centurion, the death of the Republic and the birth of the Roman Empire under Augustus 27 BC to 14 CE marked a turning point for the centurion. In this new age of centralized power, Augustus professionalized the military like never before, turning the legions into a career force that would dominate the known world for centuries. The new role of the centurion. Augustus understood that to control the empire, he needed loyal and competent officers who could enforce imperial authority. He elevated the centurions to higher ranks, giving them responsibilities that went far beyond commanding soldiers. The imperial centurion now maintained discipline across the legions, ensuring that Rome's military remained the most efficient force on earth, served as administrators in conquered provinces, enforcing Roman law and tax collection, acted as intelligence officers, reporting potential threats to the emperor, oversaw major construction projects, including roads, fortresses, and aqueducts. Centurions were no longer just warriors, they were managers of empire, and their power only grew with time. The prestige and privileges of the centurion. Under the empire, centurions became an elite class within the military. While they still laid men into battle, they also enjoyed privileges that set them apart from common soldiers. Centurions and wealth. A typical legionary earned about 300 denarii per year, while a centurion could earn up to 15 times that amount. The highest-ranking centurions, like the primus pilus, could earn even more. This wealth gave them access to Roman high society, allowing them to own land and estates, marry into wealthy families, patronize artists, philosophers, and gladiators. Some centurions even became senators, a privilege once reserved for Rome's aristocrats. This shows how far they had come from their humble beginnings as battlefield officers. The distinctive uniform of the centurion. Centurions were instantly recognizable, either elaborate armor and equipment, which included a transverse crest on their helmets, setting them apart from regular soldiers, greaves, shin guards, and the decorated breastplate, a vitus vine staff, a symbol of their authority and a tool for disciplining soldiers. This striking appearance reinforced their authority, making it clear that they were not to be challenged. Centurions as imperial enforcers. As Rome's empire expanded, emperors increasingly relied on centurions not just for war, but for governance. These men became the trusted enforcers of imperial power, ensuring that governors, local elites, and even senators obeyed Rome's will. Centurions in the provinces. A single governor could not control an entire province alone. Instead, he relied on centurions to collect taxes and ensure the population complied with Roman law, oversee major public works such as roads, aqueducts, and military forts, suppress rebellions and punish those who defied imperial rule. This made centurions feared and respected figures across the empire. In some cases, their power rivaled that of provincial governors. The brutality of centurion justice. Centurions were known for their strict discipline both in the army and in civilian governance. Their punishments could be harsh, including public floggings for those who disobeyed orders, summary executions for deserters or rebellious subjects, heavy taxation and forced labor on conquered peoples. This ruthlessness ensured that Rome's empire remained stable, but it also made centurions deeply unpopular in certain regions, fueling resistance against Roman rule. When centurions challenged the emperors, with their increasing power, some centurions overstepped their authority, challenging the very emperors they served. The Praetorian Guard and the murder of emperors. The Praetorian Guard, an elite unit of soldiers stationed in Rome, was composed mainly of veteran centurions. Over time, this force became a kingmaker, deposing and even assassinating emperors. In 41 CE, the Praetorians murdered Emperor Caligula and installed Claudius on the throne. In 69 CE, known as the Year of the Four Emperors, the Praetorians played a key role in the chaotic power struggle. In 193 CE, the Guard auctioned off the Roman throne to the highest bidder, a shocking example of their unchecked power. Rebellious centurions and civil wars. Some centurions joined rebellions against the empire, believing they could challenge weak rulers. Notable examples include Lucius Antonius Saturninus, a governor and former centurion, who led a revolt against Emperor Domitian in 89 CE. The centurions of Britain, who helped spark the famous rebellion of Queen Boudica in 60 CE by brutally mistreating the local population. These cases show that centurions were not just servants of Rome, they were sometimes its greatest threat. The imperial centurion, warrior, ruler, and power broker. The Roman centurion of the imperial age was far more than a battlefield commander. He was a guardian of Rome's interests, both on and off the battlefield, a figure of immense privilege, enjoying wealth and influence, a potential rival to the emperor, capable of shaping the course of history. The decline of the Roman centurion. From warriors to bureaucrats, the centurion, once the backbone of Rome's military machine, found himself in a rapidly changing world by the 3rd century CE. The empire that had stood unchallenged for centuries was now under siege from within and without. The Roman military was declining, its discipline eroding, and its enemies growing stronger. In Part 3, we will explore how political corruption and civil wars weakened the centurion's authority, the barbarization of the Roman army and its impact on centurions, how economic crises and military reforms eroded the power of centurions, the final attempts to save the Roman military, and how centurions fit into this desperate struggle. The decline of the centurion mirrors the decline of Rome itself. What was once the most feared military system in the world collapsed under its own weight. Corruption and the decay of the Roman military. By the 3rd century CE, the Roman military was no longer the disciplined force it had once been. Centurions, once the enforcers of strict order, now found themselves in an army that was increasingly chaotic. The rise of corrupt centurions. As Rome became wealthier, the military profession became more about personal gain than honor. Centurions, who once led their men into battle, now focused on bribery and extortion, demanding money from both soldiers and civilians. Selling ranks, allowing unqualified men to become officers. Desertion, as centurions abandoned their posts for better opportunities elsewhere. This was a far cry from the disciplined warriors of the past. The military ethos that had made Rome great was disappearing. The barbarization of the Roman army. One of the biggest changes to the Roman military in this period was the increasing reliance on barbarian soldiers. Rome had always recruited non-Romans into its ranks, but by the late empire, the legions were filled with Germans, Goths, and other so-called barbarians. How this affected centurions. With the influx of non-Roman recruits, centurions struggled to maintain discipline, as these new soldiers had different traditions and loyalties. Latin was no longer the dominant language in the army, making communication difficult. Roman military training was abandoned in favor of barbarian fighting styles. Centurions who had once commanded well-trained Roman soldiers now found themselves leading foreign mercenaries, many of whom had little loyalty to Rome itself. economic collapse and the decline of the military. By the 4th century CE, Rome's economy was in shambles. Inflation skyrocketed, trade declined, and tax revenues collapsed. The military, once Rome's greatest asset, became a financial burden. How this weakened the centurion class. Lower-paid centurions who had once been highly paid now struggled to survive. Fewer resources, gifts, training, and equipment were no longer a priority, leaving the legions weaker than ever. Disloyal soldiers gives without proper pay and rewards. Many soldiers deserted or even switched sides. The centurions, once symbols of Roman power, could do little to stop the decline. The last stand of the Roman centurion. Despite the empire's struggles, some centurions remained loyal to the bitter end. The campaigns of Aurelian and Diocletian. Emperors like Aurelian r. 270–275 CE and Diocletian r. 284–305 CE tried to reform the military, bringing back some of the old discipline and traditions. Centurions played a key role in these efforts, but it was too little, too late. The fall of the Western Roman Empire. By the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire was beyond saving. Centurions who had once enforced Roman rule were now powerless. The empire relied almost entirely on barbarian mercenaries who had no loyalty to Rome. In 476 CE, the last Roman emperor in the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed, marking the official end of the Western Empire. Centurions, once the masters of the battlefield, had become irrelevant. The world had changed, and Rome was no longer the unstoppable force it once was. The legacy of the Roman centurion. The echoes of Rome's greatest soldiers. The Roman centurion was more than just an officer, he was the backbone of the greatest military machine the world had ever seen. For centuries, these hardened warriors led Rome's legions to conquest and glory, forging an empire that stretched from Britain to the Middle East. But even after the fall of Rome, the legacy of the centurion lived on. This chapter will explore how the Roman centurion influenced warfare long after Rome's collapse, shaping the armies of medieval Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and even modern military structures. The centurion's role may have faded with Rome, but his influence never truly disappeared. In this final installment, we will examine how the Byzantine Empire adapted and modified the Roman military system, the lasting impact of Roman military discipline on medieval and Renaissance warfare, how the centurion's leadership model influenced modern military officer ranks, the myth versus reality of the Roman centurion in popular culture. Even today, the mark of the centurion remains, proving that Rome's military traditions never truly died, they simply evolved. The centurion in the Byzantine Empire. From centurion to Byzantine officer. The evolution of Rome's military command. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, the Eastern Roman Empire, better known as the Byzantine Empire, carried on Rome's military traditions for nearly 1,000 more years. While the centurion as a specific rank disappeared, his spirit lived on in the Byzantine military hierarchy. Byzantine armies were deeply influenced by Roman tactics, but they adapted to new threats and challenges. The centurion's role evolved into new officer positions, including the centurcho centarch, the closest Byzantine equivalent to a Roman centurion. These men commanded units of roughly 100 to 200 soldiers, maintaining discipline and leading troops in battle. The drongarios, a higher-ranking officer. This position controlled multiple units, similar to a Roman tribune, and was responsible for overseeing military organization. The strategos, the Byzantine general, who embodied the strategic brilliance of Roman commanders. Though these ranks had different names, the core principles of Roman military command remained intact: discipline, meritocracy, at least in theory, and the idea that a strong officer corps was essential to battlefield success. The Byzantine military, a hybrid of Rome and the East. While the early Byzantine military closely resembled a late Roman army, it gradually evolved to incorporate Greek, Persian, and steppe warfare influences. The famous cataphracts, heavily armored cavalry, were inspired by Persian and Parthian cavalry units. The Byzantine theme system, a military administrative system, replaced Rome's legionary model by stationing professional soldiers in provinces to defend against invasions. The Byzantine emphasis on siege warfare and defensive strategy differed from Rome's aggressive conquest-based military doctrine. Yet, even as the Byzantine army changed, the centurion's influence persisted. Officers still demanded strict discipline, and experienced warriors still led men into battle. The centurion may have disappeared in name, but his spirit remained embedded in Byzantine military culture. The centurion's influence on medieval and Renaissance warfare. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Europe plunged into the chaos of the Middle Ages. However, Rome's military legacy did not vanish. Instead, it became the foundation for medieval military structures. Knights and sergeants, the medieval equivalent of the centurion. During the medieval period 500 to 1500 CE, armies were far less professional than Rome's legions. However, some roles mirrored the centurion's function. Knights and men-at-arms, heavily armored cavalry who led troops into battle, bore similarities to centurions in their command role. Sergeants, non-noble warriors who led contingents of infantry, often enforced discipline and trained troops just like centurions. The rise of standing armies in the late Middle Ages, particularly in France and England, saw the return of professional soldiers led by experienced officers, much like the Roman system. While medieval warfare was more decentralized than Rome's legions, the basic principles of Roman military organization remained influential. The Renaissance and the revival of Roman military tactics. The Renaissance 1300 to 1600 CE saw a renewed interest in Roman military strategy, as scholars and generals study ancient Roman texts to improve warfare. The centurion's legacy influenced pike and musket formations in the 16th century, which required disciplined officers to maintain unit cohesion just like in a Roman legion. The creation of formal officer ranks in European armies, where sergeants and captains played leadership roles similar to centurions. The emphasis on discipline and drill, particularly in early modern armies, like those of the Spanish tercios and the Dutch military reforms under Maurice of Nassau. The Roman model of trained, professional soldiers led by experienced officers never truly disappeared, it simply evolved. The centurion's legacy in modern military ranks. Even today, military officer ranks reflect the influence of the Roman centurion. The concept of a strong, disciplined non-commissioned officer NCO leading troops from the front is still used worldwide. The centurion's influence on modern NCOs. In modern military organizations, the non-commissioned officer NCO corps sergeants, warrant officers, and lieutenants carry out many of the same duties as Roman centurions, leading troops in combat, enforcing discipline and training soldiers, acting as a bridge between enlisted men and high-ranking officers. Armies such as the US, Marine Corps, British Army, and French Foreign Legion place immense importance on NCO leadership, directly echoing the Roman military tradition. Myth versus reality. The centurion in popular culture. In modern media, the Roman centurion is often portrayed as a fearless warrior leading legions into battle. But how accurate is this depiction? Common myths about centurions. Myth: centurions always fought on the front lines. Reality: while centurions did engage in combat, their main role was command and discipline. They were leaders, not just fighters. Myth: all centurions were noble-born or elite warriors. Reality: many centurions came from humble backgrounds and worked their way up the ranks. Myth: the Roman army was invincible under centurion leadership. Reality: Rome suffered devastating defeats, such as the Battle of Teutoburg Forest 09 CE, where poor leadership led to the annihilation of 3 legions. The centurion in modern movies and games. The centurion remains a popular figure in movies, TV shows, and video games, from Gladiator to Total War. Rome. While these portrayals often exaggerate the role of centurions, they help keep their legend alive. The immortal legacy of the centurion. The centurion may have vanished as a rank, but his influence never died. From the Byzantine Empire to modern military structures, the principles of discipline, leadership, and battlefield command remain unchanged. Rome may have fallen, but its military traditions still shape warfare today. The centurion, once the backbone of the Roman legions, remains a timeless symbol of leadership and martial excellence.